Marianne Lark always believed the best maps were like diaries, half-truths, half-confessions, committed to ink only when the cartographer was certain nobody else would ever read them. That was why, 8 years earlier, working late in a cramped apartment above a baker's shop, she had invented her own private system of symbols, tiny sigils that no one but she could decipher. A 5-pointed star tucked inside a crescent meant an abandoned tunnel worth exploring. 3 staggered dots beneath a horizontal slash warned of loose earth. Her favorite was a coiled serpent with a missing eye, unstable ground hiding something worth protecting. Those symbols never appeared on the public maps she sold to tourism boards, hikers, or the county archive. They belonged only in the margins of her personal notebooks, the ones locked in a steel cabinet no one else had the key to. So when she opened her laptop on a drizzly Thursday morning and saw her coiled serpent plastered across a viral treasure-hunting forum, iced coffee sloshed over the rim of her mug, and soaked a week's worth of survey invoices. The post was headlined, "The Sand Serpent Quest. Final riddle dropped." Beneath it, a grainy photo showed a laminated parchment jammed onto a bulletin board, its edges rippling under flash glare. The parchment displayed a truncated map of Port Argent's northern dunes, overlaid with Marianne's serpent symbol, the crescent star, and half a dozen other sigils she recognized like fingerprints. There were 4,000 comments. Teenagers argued with middle-aged dads about coordinate conversions. Amateur cryptographers debated whether the serpent pointed to tide pools or desert apples. Nobody asked what the symbols actually meant, because they all assumed they were fictional ornaments invented by the game's mysterious designer. Marianne stared until her screen dimmed. Then she clicked to enlarge the map. The coastline was hers, the contour lines hers, the pencil notation motion hazard. Flattened dunes? Definitely hers. The last time she'd drawn that section was 2 summers ago while surveying a proposal to expand the coastal boardwalk. Those sketches had never left her apartment. "Impossible," she whispered, though the word offered no comfort. Someone had broken her lockbox, stolen her private drafts, and turned them into a citywide hunt promising buried treasure. She reopened the post, scrolling faster now. A user called Map Maestro had been feeding clues to players since May. Each week, a riddle pointed to a new physical cache. First a key, then a cipher wheel, then a sand-encrusted compass. Whoever Map Maestro was, they had managed to mobilize half the city. Software engineers sneaking out on their lunch breaks, high school kids skirting curfews, YouTubers live-streaming arguments over multipath error. Port Argent had transformed into one sprawling coordinate system. Marianne's anger iced over into panic when she noticed the date on the final clue. Today, 5 p.m. Her phone vibrated. Detective Thomas Reyes's name glowed on the caller ID. She hadn't spoken to him since he'd hosted a town hall panel on historical mapping fraud last winter, inviting her to lecture. She answered, still staring at her stolen serpent. "Marianne, it's Reyes. Are you near Dockman Park?" "No. Why?" "There's been an incident at the miniature golf course." He paused. Nolan Breyer was found buried in one of the sand traps, alive but unconscious. Nolan Breyer, her former colleague at the county survey office, turned rival after he'd landed an exclusive contract to digitize the city's floodplain maps. He'd always coveted her notebooks, once even offering 5 figures for access. She'd refused, and ever since, their interactions had been icicles masquerading as politeness. "I don't understand," she managed. "Buried alive?" "Some kids heard tapping under the sand," Reyes said. Groundkeepers dug him out before he suffocated. Paramedics are moving him to St. Agnes. This might relate to the so-called sand serpent quest. His pockets were full of prop tokens from the game. Marianne's pulse drummed in her ears. Nolan, suffocating under dunes, whose hazards she had catalogued using the very symbols now plastered online, symbols only he had expressed interest in. "Are you asking me to come in?" she asked. "I'm asking if you'll help decipher the markings found stamped into the trap's retaining wall. The on-scene officers think they're decorations. I think they're maps." He texted a photo. It was angled, blurry, and poorly lit, but Marianne's breath caught anyway. The retaining wall bore 3 of her secret sigils: serpent, star crescent, triple dot, in a sequence she'd used once before, to mark a stretch of unstable subsoil underneath the fairgrounds. Someone had buried Nolan exactly where the symbols warned about loose earth. Someone who knew what they meant. "Detective," she said, packing her bag. "Send me the address. I'll be there in 10. Dockman Park's golf course smelled of wet turf and kettle corn from the concession stand. A thin crowd milled behind yellow tape, phones aloft for the next viral clip. Reyes met her at the 11th hole bunker, its sand still cratered from the rescue. "There," he said, pointing at the wall. Up close, the carvings looked fresh, shallow, and intentionally sloppy, as though stamped with improvised tools. Marianne traced each one, fingertips buzzing. 2 summers ago, these symbols had sat quietly in her notebook. Now they were weaponized language. "Why hasn't Nolan talked?" she asked. "He regained consciousness briefly in the ambulance," Reyes said. "Rambled about parchment and betrayal, then passed out again. We'll question him once the doctors let us." Marianne stepped onto the compacted sand, letting her boots sink just enough to gauge depth. The killer, if attempted murder rather than hazing gone wrong, had needed privacy. The golf course closed at midnight. A body buried at 2 a.m. might not be discovered for hours. But burying someone alive required a map telling you which bunker had earth soft enough to excavate, but firm enough to stay put afterward. Only a person fluent in Marianne's notation would have selected this exact pit. A drone buzzed overhead, one of the treasure hunt streamers broadcasting live. She glanced at her watch. 3:15 p.m., less than 2 hours until the final clue's deadline. The city's players would be fanning out soon, dig tools in hand, searching for the ultimate prize. If the same mastermind considered living competitors disposable obstacles, more graves might be dug before nightfall. Reyes tracked her gaze. "You think the treasure game and this assault are tied?" "Yes." She hesitated, then added, "Because the symbols are mine." It felt like confessing a crime. Reyes raised an eyebrow. She explained. The private code, the locked notebooks, her conviction that Nolan must have stolen or copied pages. She finished by pointing at the serpent. That was never meant for public view. Reyes crossed his arms. "Then we need to stop this quest before someone else gets hurt. Can you get ahead of the players?" "Maybe. The final clue drops at 5. But if I look at the partial map they posted, I can extrapolate the endpoint." "Do it," he said. "I'll request a warrant to seize whatever or Map Maestro posted, but that takes time we don't have." Marianne hurried to the picnic table where she'd left her bag. A squad car's laptop provided hotspot access. She downloaded the parchment screenshot and overlaid it on her archived coastal survey. The serpent sat near a cluster of irregular dunes behind the defunct glassworks factory, an area cordoned off after sinkholes swallowed equipment 2 decades ago. She zoomed in, aligning faint grid marks. Beneath the serpent symbol, the parchment bore numbers 72.9, 18.4. On her original, those were soil stability coefficients, not coordinates. But plug them into a basic Caesar shift, and 72.9 became H, 18.4 became THT. The final two letters of sight, maybe. She panned left. A faint watermark, Nolan Breyer's company logo, sat in the corner. He'd copied her draft, stamped his mark, and apparently lent it to the game's designer. Had he volunteered or been blackmailed? She layered additional clues from earlier posts. Threaded together, they pointed to a hidden depression on Lot C of the old glassworks, an abandoned sandpit where silica for bottle production had been stored. The parallels chilled her. Nolan had been buried in a sandpit. The quest would climax in another. 4:10 p.m. She called Reyes. Endpoint is the glassworks sandpit off Mariner Road. It's on private land, but the fence is torn down. Contestants will swarm it. Meet me there, he ordered. No heroics. The glassworks loomed like a bleached skeleton against rain-fat clouds. Its chain-link fence sagged, clipped open by scavengers who stripped copper months ago. As Marianne parked beside Reyes's cruiser, other vehicles squealed to a stop. Teenagers with selfie sticks, adults in hiking boots, one man in a three-piece suit brandishing a metal detector. Reyes had stationed 2 uniformed officers at the lot entrance, but the crowd pushed through before tape could go up. Shouts ricocheted between steel girders. "This is private property," Reyes boomed. "You're trespassing." Nobody listened. The final clue had promised a prize that will rewrite the city's story. The possibility of gold or priceless artifacts trumped trespass law. Marianne jogged alongside Reyes towards the largest pit, a bowl 30 meters across, its floor layered with rain-packed sand. Contestants slid down the slope, scanning phones for GPS fixes. One boy swung a shovel like a tennis racket. Others knelt to sift by hand, screaming each time metal scraped rock. At the pit's southern rim, Marianne spotted a wooden crate half buried, its lid branded with her coiled serpent. People tugged at it, but the crate wouldn't budge, anchored by steel cables running into the sand. That wasn't her doing. Someone had prepared this stage, knowing dozens of treasure hunters would converge. "Detective!" a voice yelped. A young woman stumbled up the incline, face streaked with grit. "He's down there. Some guy's bleeding." Reyes radioed for medical backup and slid into the pit. Marianne followed. The crowd parted around a figure sprawled beside the crate. He wore cargo pants soaked by crimson and clutched a satchel stuffed with parchment scrolls. Recognition jerked through Marianne. Jasper Glover, one of Nolan's interns during the floodplain project. He'd once cornered her at a conference, gushing about her elegant geodesic hatches. Jasper's eyes darted wildly. "Help me," he rasped. Reyes knelt, applying pressure to a deep cut along Jasper's thigh. "What happened?" He wouldn't share the cipher," Jasper stammered, gesturing at the satchel. "Said the treasure was rightfully his. We fought. He had a knife." "Who?" Reyes demanded. But Jasper slipped into semi-conscious babble. Marianne unbuckled the satchel. Inside lay half-rolled parchment bearing her stolen drafts, overlaid with orange marker annotations. Convert soil numbers to letters. Invert slope gradient. Serpent marks dig site. One line caught her eye. Key hides in the blind eye. A thunderclap cracked overhead. The crowd gasped as rain began its drumbeat on the pit. Marianne scanned the crate. The serpent's eye was missing from the branding, exactly like her personal shorthand for entry plug. She brushed sand aside until her fingers hit a metal disc embedded in the wood, a keyhole shaped like the serpent's absent eye. "Detective," she said. I can open this if I find the key, but whoever wounded Jasper still has it. Reyes looked at the clamoring onlookers. All suspects for now, but we detain everyone until backup arrives. If you can locate the key before panic erupts, do it. Marianne thought of the riddle line, blind eye. On her original maps, serpent eyes marked direction of subterranean hollows. A missing eye meant an obstruction. She scanned the pit again. 20 feet away, a rusted metal drum stood upright, its lid dented inward like an eye socket punched out. She sprinted over, ignoring shouts. The drum was empty, save for loose sand, and something shiny half buried, an antique brass key. She yanked it free, heart hammering, and hurried back to Reyes. Rain slicked the crate's lid. She inserted the key, twisted. Cables whined, slackening. The lid popped open on hydraulic hinges. Inside lay a single object, a cylindrical steel container sealed by tamper-evident bolts, like a science-grade sample jar. On its side, stenciled in bold, Property of Port Argent Geological Survey, Core Sample 41B, 1994. Marianne's breath caught. Core Sample 41B was local legend, a drilling that had plunged unexpectedly deep, retrieving rock laced with rare earth minerals. The sample's location had been lost in a warehouse fire 20 years ago. The value wasn't mere curiosity. Whoever controlled rights to that sample could resurrect mining permits, leverage patents for extraction technologies. The treasure would, as promised, rewrite the city's story and line pockets with millions. Sudden screaming erupted at the rim. A figure in a hooded poncho pushed past officers, sliding down the slope toward Marianne, brandishing a knife smeared dark with mud and blood. His hood fell back. Wallace Kreutz, head of Horizon Cartographics, the largest private mapping firm in the state, and Nolan Breyer's recent benefactor. Rain plastered his grey hair to his temples. "Step away," he shouted. "That sample belongs to Horizon." Marianne raised her hands. "You sponsored the quest? You used my stolen maps." Kreutz's eyes were manic. "Your precious symbols? Ingenious shorthand, Miss Lark, but wasted under lock and key. I merely adapted them." He glanced at Jasper, grimacing. "Didn't expect the intern to grow a conscience." Reyes levelled his service weapon. "Knife down, Kreutz." Kreutz smiled thinly. "Shoot and risk the sample? One stray round through that cylinder, and its value drops to zero." He might be bluffing, but Marianne didn't doubt he'd gamble. She stepped sideways, positioning her body between Kreutz and the crate. In her palm, she still held the key. Serpent-eye brass, edges razor-sharp from corrosion. She remembered 3 staggered dots, unstable earth. Without thinking, she jammed the key into the crate's latch again and yanked. The hydraulic cables had unspooled, forcing them backward, twisted one until it snapped. The crate lurched, its weight shifting the sand beneath their feet. Rainwater had turned the granular floor into slurry. Load redistribution triggered what geologists called a dry flow slide. Ground liquefied. Kreutz swore, stumbling as sand sucked at his boots. Marianne leapt clear, grabbing Reyes's outstretched hand. The crate creaked, then tipped, sending the steel cylinder rolling toward the pit's lower edge, away from Kreutz. Officers dragged Jasper uphill while contestants scrambled for footing. Kreutz lunged after the container, but the sand betrayed him, swallowing his legs to the knee. Reyes advanced, gun steady. "Knife down, now." This time Kreutz obeyed, flinging it aside. 2 officers reached him, cuffing his wrists before hauling him from the mire. It was nearly midnight when Marianne finally sat in the hospital corridor outside Nolan's room. The storm had passed, leaving corridors quiet except for distant ECG beeps. Reyes emerged, face weary but satisfied. "Nolan's conscious," he said. "He's agreed to make a statement." "And?" Reyes sank into the chair beside her. "He admits stealing several of your notebooks last year, intending to reverse engineer your survey methods. Kreutz found out, bought the drafts from him. They planned the Sand Serpent quest as a marketing spectacle to crowdfund Horizon's expansion. The winner would receive a percentage of whatever profit the core sample generated, except Kreutz never intended to award a winner. He was going to stage a grand finale, retrieve the sample himself, declare the hunt unsolved, and keep the cash. "A spectacle with conveniently free labor," Marianne muttered. "Thousands of volunteers digitizing clues, scouting terrain." Exactly. Nolan got cold feet when he realized Kreutz talked about eliminating competition literally. He tried to hide, then threatened to expose the scheme. Kreutz buried him alive as warning. Reyes rubbed his temples. "We're charging Kreutz with attempted murder, ×2, theft of intellectual property, several trespassing counts, and reckless endangerment. The DA's going to have fun." Marianne folded her hands. "What about my symbols, my notebooks?" "We recovered most during the search of Kreutz's office. There'll be evidence for a while, then returned. The city council already contacted me. They're interested in buying licensed access to your mapping code for hazard mitigation." He smiled. "I hope you set a price." She considered the concept. Her private language turned public good. Maybe maps were meant to be diaries, but diaries could educate if handled responsibly. "I'll think about it." Reyes pushed up from the chair. "Jasper's stable, by the way. Said to thank you." She nodded. "I'll visit him tomorrow." "What about Nolan?" "For Nolan," she said quietly. "I'll wait." Reyes squeezed her shoulder and departed, leaving her with the muted hum of hospital machinery. Marianne closed her aching eyes. In her mind, dunes shifted, coiling serpents uncoiled, and crescent stars rose above new horizons. She'd spent years drawing boundaries between what the world could see and what it could not. Tonight, those walls had cracked, but instead of feeling violated, she felt possibility breathe through the gaps. Maybe the purpose of a secret map wasn't to stay secret forever, but to reach the right hands at the right time. Still, she would need new symbols, ones nobody else had ever seen. She smiled to herself, already sketching shapes across the blank screen of her thoughts, seeds of a language born from betrayal, tempered by trust, waiting for the day the world was ready to read it.